What if the galaxy judged humanity not for its courage, but for its instinct to run? A single name, those who flee sparked ridicule, war, and eventually, something far more dangerous, respect. From burning skies to blood-soaked deserts, this is the story of how the hunted became the storm. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and show your support by liking the video. Your thumb fuels our stories. Now, let's jump into the epic that changed everything. Senate historian Morrell stood in the spotlight of the Grand Forum, his thin voice carrying through hidden speakers to every tier of polished stone. Delegates of 43 worlds listened, some with folded arms, some with twitching antennae, but all with that mix of boredom and curiosity that traditions always inspired. Morrell reminded them why they had gathered. From the earliest age of warp sails, he said, every civilization to join the Star Union had chosen a playing, two-word title, an epithet meant to honor the single quality that pushed it from darkness into the light of the stars. The soaring Vala called themselves those who climb, proud of the long vines they once scaled. The nomadic motor chose those who wander, remembering endless migrations across crystal plains. Even the hive-minded Rin, who shared one dream across billions of bodies, spoke modestly as those who are one. The rule sounded silly when written on paper, Morrell admitted, but it served a purpose. A name became a promise, a reminder, and at times a warning. Long after his speech faded, people would debate whether the tradition promoted pride or pigeonholes, but no one doubted its staying power. It had survived war, plague, and political storms because, like many old customs, it gave the lumbering union a sense of weight. Changing it would require movement, and movement was exactly what the union avoided. All of this context mattered, because humanity, bright, loud, curious humanity, had finally pushed past its corner of space and petitioned for membership. For 3 sub-cycles, the marble halls gossiped about which title the newcomers would choose. Scholars opened ancient human broadcasts, trying to guess whether courage, invention, or stubbornness would win the vote. Traders hoped for something marketable, diplomats hoped for something mild, and bookmakers took wagers thick enough to clog the data screens. So when human ambassador Jonar Vaz stepped to the podium on induction day, cleared his throat, and said, "Our species will be known as those who flee," the entire chamber fell into a stunned hush. Some delegates laughed because they thought it was a joke. Others leaned toward translation drones, assuming a glitch. But Jonar repeated the phrase in perfect Union Common and in 3 regional dialects, and finally in his own rolling tone, "Those who flee." He bowed, signed the charter, and left the podium still wearing an unreadable smile. The reaction was swift and confused. Biologists admitted the title made a certain sense human bodies were built less for raw speed than for simple endurance, able to trot across savannas long after faster beasts collapsed. Yet there were hundreds of braver words they might have lifted up. Why brag about running? In high balconies, the diplomats of the Kargol Empire took special notice. The Kargol, who lived and died by the blade, held the fierce title, "Those who scour," and they measured every rival by willingness to fight. To them, the human's choice sounded like a squeak of prey, an easy target. During the quiet weeks after the ceremony, Ambassador Jonar worked the committee floors. He visited food exchanges, art halls, and even the dusty archives where Junior clerks filed border treaties that no one ever read. He spoke softly, listened more than he talked, and left small gifts, a music chip, a seed in a glass vial, a child's drawing scanned from a refugee station. People liked him. They called him modest, even kind, but not many promised help if trouble came. Kindness won friends. It did not always win allies. Meanwhile, Kargol Senator Grax turned his attention to the Union's oldest loopholes. He was not cruel by personal taste. He simply believed in striking weakness before it became strength. If the humans could be cornered alone, far from protective treaties, the cargo could seize fresh territory without triggering the web of alliance defense. The weapon he planned to use was the ritual of Durath, an ancient trial by war that forbade outside support. To invoke Durath required careful paperwork, a string of minor border complaints, evidence true or forged of human trespass, and a public claim that peace negotiations had failed. Grax's staff spent long hours weaving that net. Rumors seeped through marble walls like moisture. Aides whispered that the cargo were stockpiling fuel. Freight captains noticed shipping lanes shifting, their permits stalled by sudden audit queues. Joner sensed the pressure, but continued his gentle rounds, greeting suspicion with patient courtesy. When reporters asked him why his people had taken such a fearful name, he answered with a shrug. "Running is not always fear," he said. "It can be wisdom or strategy, or simply a way to reach tomorrow." The remark circulated through news feeds, sometimes mocked, sometimes praised. Back on Earth, journalists framed it under sunsets and training tracks where long-distance runners practiced steady, relentless strides. In the Union's military circles, however, the quote deepened doubts. Admirals asked each other whether humans would hold a battle line or slip away the moment fire snapped overhead. If they ran, could neighboring worlds rely on them? Weeks later, the Senate convened for what appeared to be a routine session. Delegates filled their seats. Translation. Lights glowed, and historian Murrell prepared to record the minutes. Yet tension coiled in the air. On the central floor, Senator Grax stalked forward in ceremonial armor, crimson cloak sweeping marble tiles. In both hands, he held a scroll sealed with black wax, the traditional script of Durath. Cameras zoomed in, beams of white-hot lamps, catching every etched glyph. Morale lifted his pen, breath halting as he realized the history about to unfold. At the opposite desk, Ambassador Joner rose slowly, smoothing the plain fabric of his suit, eyes fixed on the cargo predator. The room fell silent, the ceiling screens broadcasting that silence to 1,000 spectator lounges across the stars. Grax raised the scroll to chest level, muscles tense, seconds from dropping it at Joner's feet. For the first time since choosing their odd name, the humans would face the weight of that promise. And everyone in the chamber hawks doves. Cynics, romantics leaned forward to see whether those who flee would run, or whether they had something else entirely in mind. Silva smelled of cut grass and salt water on the morning the cargo fleet arrived. A scent forever burned into memory when the first plasma torpedoes slammed through the sky like newborn suns. Within minutes, forests that had stood for 10,000. Seasons curled into black ribbons, and the wide marshes where children once collected reed eggs flashed white before collapsing into hiss and steam. The planet was humanity's pride, a garden world cultivated in harmony rather than conquest, defended only by a token patrol of Corvette-class watchers, and a scattering of surface cannons that existed more for ceremony than war. Because who would raise a blade against a place built to prove a better future? Captain Lena Tarek, barely 26 standard years and commander of the scout cutter Starling, skimmed the atmosphere just as the alarms shrieked. She ordered an impossible diving burn to evacuate civilians, knowing the Starling's thin hull would not last in full combat, yet she could not abandon orbit entirely. From her cracked cockpit glass, she watched the cargo banners flicker on carrier hulls' jagged red glyphs, meaning those who scour while Union news drones bob nearby. Politely neutral lenses recording as if history were a sport. Inside the Senate 2 systems away, Ambassador Joner's plea for arbitration dissolved against marble walls. Dirath had been invoked, and the charter chained every ally's hands. So Silva burned alone. Surface relays failed one by one, but Lena's emergency frequency caught a last message from elder botanist Sinead Vale. "Tell the stars we kept singing until the trees went quiet." When the final defense satellite cracked apart, Lena punched the nav board and fled, engines wheezing, sorrow flooding every bone, yet refusing to become despair. Because despair is useless in vacuum. Hours later, she limped into the hidden yard at Horizon Dock, a hollowed asteroid where freighters usually met for refuel and gossip, now stuffed with refugees and hollow-eyed militia. There she found Bront, a retired vacuum welder built like a cargo rig, skin marked with old shipyard burns. While Union commentators predicted humanity's swift capitulation, those who flee always run. They chirped Bront had bolted rotary cannons to a grain hauler the locals called Soft Delight. "Nothing soft now," he grunted, tossing Lena a battered flight harness. Across the bay, engineers welded mining drills onto tug prows, and families who once traded flowers now filled empty crates with scrap metal to serve as shrapnel rounds. They lacked shields, target computers, even uniform paint, but they had engines and anger, and each hull carried the memory of green Silva fields. Word spread faster than any official dispatch. Lena's orbit footage, the floating embers, the way she held her course until her nav lights baked amber. Small craft from moons and fuel depots answered the call, arriving raw and unregistered. By the third day, a swarm of 49 Technicals cargo scows, ore trawlers, postal jumpers faced Cargill Supply Depot Vardis Station, a fat ring-world segment bristling with guns yet built for storage. Not sudden siege, the Battle of Vardis did not unfold with graceful tactics. It was a bar fight in zero-G. Lena's Starling led the charge, engines rattling against red lines, while Bront's Soft Delight punched a hole in the outer plating with its mining drill set to continuous burn. Freighter after freighter followed, ramming hatches, disgorging. Crews armed with rivet lances and coil nail pikes. Cargill Marines wore gleaming armor but slipped on leaked coolant. Welders sealed bulkhead doors behind themselves, turning corridors into one-way traps. By the time a proper Cargill destroyer scrambled from distant escort duty, Vardis had already lit up from within, each depot tank venting like a wounded beast. Lena broadcast a simple message on an open band. "We run only long enough to choose our ground." Millions across the network replayed that line, splicing it under footage of jury-rigged guns firing through shattered viewports. Union anchors who had doubted the humans rewrote their segments midstream, praising improvisation while still calling it a temporary flare. Back in Cargill High Command, Admiral Shaksu pored over casualty reports with a scowl that cracked the scales. Along his jawline, his empire had expected a quick lesson, a frightened retreat, but Vardis proved the prey could bite. So he drafted a new directive: crush the human hub at Soul Exchange, seize orbital foundries before these scavenger fleets could harden into a real navy, and display the corpses along the Union border as reminder of the old order. War drums echoed through Cargill Helix towers, while fresh troop carriers aligned their jump beacons. On Horizon Dock, Lena counted hull patches. Bront recalibrated jury-rigged rail spools, and refugee farmers volunteered as gunners because their hands, used to harvest, could also pull triggers. No one claimed victory. Silva was still ash, its surface cooling under toxic clouds, but hope ragged. Unsteady hope had survived inside the cargo bays of worn-out freighters. And as the swarms refueled for the next defense, the universe finally understood those who flee was not a confession of cowardice at all. It was a tactic older than metal, the long race of persistence hunters who chase until stronger legs break from exhaustion. Admiral Shaksu's Grand Armada powered up reactors, confident the next strike would end the nuisance, unaware that every plume of their engines marked a point on the silent maps of scavenger captains who had already learned how to turn running into the deadliest form of engagement. The stage was set, iron jaws versus relentless stride, and somewhere between the two burned the memory of a green world that would never let its last guardians stop moving. Within the noise of plasma torches and hammer strikes, humanity remade itself, turning desperation into an industry of war as ceaseless as breathing. Every abandoned freight ring, every decommissioned yard around Seoul fired back to life, guided by the unflinching eye of chief designer Nura Vale, whose first order was simple: build like the forests of Silva still speak. Hull plates cut from asteroid iron were stamped with the ghosted silhouettes of trees, double-layered for strength, and each finished vessel bore the name of a place lost in the garden planet's fire-white cypress, Windheath, Ember Pineso. The crews would never forget why the furnaces roared. Ore convoys arrived under fighter escort, and schoolteachers on Mars welded bulkheads beside miners from Ceres, while children in Lunahab tunnels recorded messages that were etched onto data. Tiles then sealed inside bridge bulkheads, small voices promising to keep running until the war was done. Outside Union space, skeptics predicted that such rapid mass production would collapse under its own weight. Yet the first wave of new war cutters slid from dry dock only 30 days after Vardis, engines glowing like sunrise against industrial night, and immediately jumped to reinforce Lena Tarek's battered flotilla near Frostfall Ridge, a lonely ice belt the Cargill sought as a staging post. Battle came like a winter storm. Cargill cruisers advanced in tight phalanx, spines bristling with cannon arrays, but found themselves harried by smaller human cutters darting in three-ship spirals, dumping reflective chaff that fooled heat seekers, then circling back to deliver rail spool salvos straight into unarmored aft vents. When the cruisers tried to pivot, cargo corvettes, wallowing but stubborn, rammed their bows into the turning arcs, slowing them just long enough for the cutters to peel away and fire again. Ice shards the size of towers spun through wreckage fields, glittering under weapon flashes. News drones captured every frame, broadcasting to union lounges where comfortable diplomats watched in silence, as an empire built on pride bled for the first time in centuries. The ridge fell, and with it the myth of Cargill invincibility began to crack. From there, the iron tide rolled on. At Dusk Reef, a shimmering dust nebula lit by twin suns, Lena's fleet deployed improvised mirror kites thin metal sheets dragged behind shuttles to scatter sunlight and blind incoming targeting arrays. Inside the glare, troop dropships threaded narrow canyons of rubble asteroids, landing strike teams in the heart of a fuel depot before external guns could calibrate. The depot erupted, painting the nebula with ribbons of orange fire the Union artists later called the Scar of Dusk. 2 weeks later, at Arengate, an artificial wormhole ring defended by 8 Cargill dread carriers, the new human flagship. Heart of Wildfire emerged, a slab of black metal wider than the ring mouth, its bow carved into a blade point that glowed red from permanent reactor bleed. Maneuver jets twisted the ship on its axis, while triple spinal lasers fired in sequence, carving a luminous trench across the dread carrier's flight decks. The Cargill admirals, confident that raw tonnage would overwhelm any upstart fleet, could only watch as their own hangars ignited and half-readied fighters melted inside. Panic wormed through the Empire's officer corps. Counselor Rilix, silver-crusted and once famous for boasting that his people were born with war in their marrow, drafted a motion for limited peace, citing supply shortages and the unexpected quality of human shipbuilding. His proposal stalled. When the royal brood dismissed talk of mercy as weakness, but the very fact it existed leaked across command channels, eroding morale faster than missiles ever could. Desertions appeared in logbooks, small patrol craft vanishing at shift change, escort frigates arriving late with suspiciously empty brig cells where outspoken crew had escaped. Meanwhile, Union planets that had once courted human trade quietly shuttered their embassy doors, fearing the cargo might retaliate or worse, that the relentless species who called themselves those who flee would turn their unstoppable momentum. Elsewhere, once the Empire finally broke, through it all, Lena slept in 5-minute bursts on a narrow bunk welded beside Starling's bridge ladder, waking to status reports that read like heartbeat lines. Another cutter finished, another depot raided, another jump beacon captured. Bronze patched together. Flagship Soft Delight survived every firefight, its mining drill now blessed with a nameplate, Silva's Fang. Nora Vale sent fresh schematics daily, heavier armor angles, self-forging shrapnel rounds designed to split and arc back under enemy. Shields, engine housings that vented plasma sideways, so fleeing ships left clouds hot enough to burn pursuing fighters' intakes. On human channels, a simple 3-note whistle became the battle cry first overheard when welders signaled shift change. Now pulsed overcomes before each engagement, a ghost sound that traveled faster than light lag, prickling ears in every. Cargill war room got at last. The Iron Tide reached Kryn, jewel of the Cargill border and last true bastion before the throne world. Imperial analysts predicted a siege of months. Lena ordered the assault within a day, her advanced squadrons punching holes through outer pickets, sowing smart mines that rode tractor beams into docking spines, and clearing safe drops for breacher pods. The heart of wildfire severed Kryn's orbital ring with a single broadside, debris fields collapsing in glittering arcs like falling crowns. Surface batteries fired helplessly at impossible angles, trying to track cutters that skimmed low atmosphere before ducking back to space. When the ring cracked and fell, Union observers updated diplomatic maps in real time, shading Cargill holdings with growing streaks of human gray. Somewhere deep behind collapsing fronts, Admiral Shaksu tasted bitter metal in his throat as reports stacked atop each other, each stamped with the same final word. Lost dot in the hush that followed Kryn's fall. Humanity did not pause to plant flags or recite oaths. Instead, Lena set new coordinates straight toward the Empire's heart, and shipyards across Seoul answered by sending another wave of steel warships, christened with the names of rivers, birds, and moonlit glades that no longer existed. Forge. Heat glowed like dawn behind every porthole, and the engines of the Iron Tide thundered onward, not in triumph, but in grim, unyielding memory of green horizons turned to ash. Dawn crept over the desert moon of Ubrin as a pale gray smear. Weak sunlight filtered through layers of metallic dust that shimmered like frost, yet stung like glass. Prince Zarth of the Cargill, last heir of the brood that had ordered Silva's. Burning, crouched beside a cracked ridge and whispered curses at the useless scrap of his emergency beacon. The moon's ion storms fried every circuit. His once gleaming escape pod lay a gutted shell half a kilometer back. He had spent 3 nights moving only at dusk and dawn, hunting nocturnal lizards with a shard of cockpit glass, drinking condensation scraped from stones. Each footstep made a dry hiss, the sound of ash on ash. In the quiet he imagined voices, distant soldiers, loyal commanders, but no help came. Zarth began to understand how an empire could die long before its prince did. Beyond the horizon, Captain Lena Tarek studied the same wasteland through sand-striped goggles. She and 5 comrades had landed in a canvas glider because energy drives would have announced their arrival. Their rifles were wrapped in fabric to hide silver glare. At night, they walked by the faint glow of chemical maps painted on their sleeves. They were not hunters by training. They were ship pilots, welders, medics. Yet the long war had turned them into something older persistence trackers, using patience instead of sensors. Every hour, Lena paused to press her hand against the ground, feeling for prints too light for scanners. A chipped scale, a dragged boot, the place's dust had settled differently after someone tried to sweep it away. The team advanced in silent relay, their water flasks rationed to half sips. They carried no banners. The only emblem was a cloth patch of a single burnt tree stitched over each heart. 3 days into the pursuit, they crested a ridge and found smoke from a makeshift fire. Not wood smoke. Outrun had no trees, but the bitter scent of scorched emergency rations. Lena signaled a halt, then circled wide while the others set a perimeter. Below, Prince Zarth knelt by a shallow pit, roasting lizard meat on a metal strip. His ornate armor, prized by every cargo officer, had been discarded in pieces to lighten his load. Only a torn cloak remained, its once vivid sigils faded to dusty burgundy. When Lena stepped into view, rifle lowered but ready, the prince sprang up, holding the spit like a blade. "Stay back," he rasped. Voice cracked from thirst. Lena removed her goggles so he could see her eyes. "There is nowhere to run but farther into sand," she said, "and we will keep following." "You came to kill me," Zarth spat. "We came for judgment," she replied. "The Union has prepared a tribunal. Surrender, and your people may rebuild without the shadow of your deeds." Zarth laughed, the sound brittle. "You think the galaxy will forgive? They already fear you. When I am gone, they will fear you more." "Fear and respect are not the same," Lena said. "We choose which one grows." He lunged. Hunger and dehydration slowed him, yet desperation gave the strike weight. Lena pivoted, caught his wrist, and used his momentum to bury him in the dust. The prince lay gasping, stubborn eyes bright with rage, but also confusion. This human, who could easily end him, held the tip of her blade above his throat and did not press down. "I will not grant you a martyr's death," she said. "Stand and walk, or lie and fade. Either way, history is watching." Hours later, shackled and staggering, Zarth reached the extraction point beside Lena's squad. A cloth hood shaded his head. They gave him water, yet tied the flask to her belt so each sip reminded him who decided the pace. Overhead, a silent shuttle descended, its hull dark to avoid orbital watchers. As they lifted through dust clouds, the first true sunrise broke over Outrun, a band of pale gold that returned color to the world. In the window's reflection, Lena saw the prince staring, lips parted, perhaps realizing that dawn could arrive. Even for a defeated man, the tribunal convened on a neutral station ringed by Union guards. Evidence projected across the chamber, the order codes for Silva's burning, intercepted logs of forced relocations, the civilian casualty tallies. Zarth, gaunt but steady, admitted every charge. His confession ended with 4 words: "Pride is not destiny." The judges, 3 human, 2 cargo reformers, and 1 impartial Rind, sentenced him to life in reconstruction labor on the worlds his fleets had scarred. The ruling carried more weight than execution. It proved the war had been about justice, not revenge. News of the trial reached every corner of known space. Union delegates who once whispered about human aggression now argued on open channels that the ancient dual law, Darath, had failed its purpose. A vote repealed it within a month, striking 10 pages from the charter that had survived millennia. On the day the amendment passed, Ambassador Jonah returned to the Grand Forum with a small case of nutrient gel and a sapling grown from Silva, seed banks rescued before the invasion. With permission, he planted it in the Forum's central garden. The soil imported loam blended from many worlds accepted the roots. Senators from rival systems helped pat down earth, their formal gloves stained dark dot in the same session. The human delegation requested a formal change to their own epithet. After quiet deliberation and unanimous external support, those who flee became those who endure. The cargo, seeking to bury the brood's legacy and rebuild trust, adopted those who rise anew. Historians noted the rare symmetry. Both titles spoke of movement, But forward now, not away. Captain Lena watched the ceremony via remote feed aboard Heart of Wildfire. Engineers worked behind her, repainting the ship's prow. The old name remained, yet beneath it a thin green line now circled the hull, the first color other than black seen on a human warship since Silva's fall. Out the viewport stretched a quiet star field. No alarms blared, no enemy markers blinked red. There was only the hum of engines idling at safe thrust, and the distant sparkle of the Union Station, where a single sapling stood beneath artificial sunlight. She exhaled, feeling the war's weight settle into memory rather than muscle. Battleships could rest. Forests might grow again. And somewhere in the dust of former battlefields, new dawns waited for every species that chose, at last, to walk instead of chase, to stand instead of scourge, to endure.